This week, a stadium made of wood, athletes powered by plants, and burgers without meat. How England's Forest Green Rovers became the world's first carbon-neutral pro sports team.
We'll have the lowest carbon footprint stadium in the world since the Romans invented concrete.
And the new sound of racing. Formula E wants to provide a shock to the system, but can the electric sport rival F1 when it comes to power and publicity?
I believe Formula E is the next generation of racing. The whole automotive industry is going electric.
Plus, beating the heat, the sport's at risk from a hotter climate and the teams capitalizing on sustainability.
It's a bit of an upfront cost to switch to those sustainable solutions, but long term, they do come out and save you money later, and it's a lot of money.
I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. The biggest enemy in sports isn't the opposing team, it's climate change. And as our planet gets warmer, get ready for profound shifts that touch every game, athlete, and spectator. We're already seeing it, from canceled baseball games to flooded cricket matches and golf courses crumbling into the sea. So I sat down with Madeline Orr, an assistant professor of sport management at SUNY Cortland and founder of the Sport Ecology Group, and I asked her what sport is most at risk.
So depending on the hazard, different sports, have different levels of vulnerability. If we're talking about heat, the first that comes to mind and top of mind for me is any endurance sport. So marathon, cycling, cross-country skiing for that matter, anything that's going to have you out there for prolonged periods of time. And then, of course, football falls into that because of the amount of gear. Similarly, if you're playing rugby, and you have just so much gear, mountain biking with all the extra equipment underneath. These are kind of some of the concerns that would make heat extra problematic. And then, on other levels, in terms of storms, in terms of wildfire, any open air sport, right? So all your outdoor sports facilities where you have, you're at risk of smoke or being exposed to poor air quality, that's where you start to see those problems pop up.
How carbon intensive are the big world events? I think of the FIFA World Cup, I think of the Olympics. What's your research tell you?
So the research all points to the same kind of conclusion, which is they are behemoths of carbon emissions. And it's not a surprise. I don't think there's really a carbon neutral way, unless you're going to offset every person's flight, to bring thousands and thousands of people to a city, have them consume and produce waste in one place for a prolonged period of time. So, 4 weeks for the Olympics because you got 2 weeks of Olympic, 2 weeks of Paralympic, and then several weeks for FIFA World Cup. And so, all that travel, all that waste, all that consumption, it's really hard to knock those numbers down and keep it reasonable. So I think overall, the numbers are outrageous, and mostly from travel.
And we, of course, don't want to lose events like these, but what could be some of the solutions to start combating that?
I mean, the obvious one is kind of a Band-Aid solution. It's not perfect, but, if we can offset whatever we can, and that's for the athletes, the coaches, the referees, the media, and the fans. We need to be thinking about every possible option to offset travel. It's the biggest contributor overall in sports. And that's true at every level of sports, like right down to your kids' soccer, tournament. Travel is going to be the biggest contributor. So we need to attack travel first. At other points, I think the IOC and FIFA have made really remarkable strides in the last 15 years, making their facilities more sustainable, working on getting sustainable food into the venues, which is promising. It's just really tough to see that effort as being fully sustainable when travel hasn't been addressed really, and travel is about 85% of that overall carbon footprint.
I also wonder, Dr. Orr, if it's about just being smarter and more creative. I'm a Yankees fan. I grew up in New York, and I'd go to Yankee Stadium to watch a game, but I've also gone to Yankee Stadium for concerts. So many Olympic stadiums sometimes just sit there. Is there a better way about thinking about, you build these massive stadiums and then they just kind of rot? Is there, maybe some regulation or better ways that organizations can think about when they build structures?
Yeah, and that's already happening, right? We're going to see LA come into play, LA 2028 in a few years here, and they're using a whole bunch of existing facilities and structures, and really that's the way of the future. In a lot of cities, there are structures that can be used. It just means that the number of fans you can have in the space is a little bit less, which is, of course, a downside. It's, when you go to the Olympics as an athlete, you're expecting to compete in front of huge fans, and if we're using existing facilities, that's not always going to be the case. Now, the additional upside of existing facilities is typically they're on a bus line or on the metro or the subway, and all of a sudden it's a lot easier for people to get there without having to drive a personal car. And you've built in a facility that's sustainable and a transit link that's sustainable, and all of a sudden the carbon footprint of that event goes way down.
So I get what a lot you're saying is really the travel to and from the event. What about the NFL and the MLB in America? What are they doing to start to combat climate change?
So with both of those leagues, it really is a team-by-team effort. Some are more progressive than others. The Philadelphia Eagles, for example, have been really progressive with their campaign for reducing overall emissions. I believe they have, wind turbines on site. They have a forest that they've started planting over several years as an offset. But there's not many, Philadelphia Eagles teams out there right now, unfortunately. And, we would like to see more of that happening. It's not top of mind at the moment, and it wasn't before COVID, and then COVID hits and all of a sudden we're trying to keep the lights on, let alone turn them off. So it's going to be an uphill challenge to make this top of mind, but it is possible. And I think what people come around to eventually when they get into the data on this is it does make you money. It's a bit of an upfront cost to switch to those sustainable solutions, but long term, they do come out and save you money later. And it's a lot of money. So I think, when we pitch it that way to the owners, to the management groups, we get favorable responses. And then all of a sudden, it's just about, okay, now that we know we're going to try to tackle that climate footprint, that GHG footprint, where do we start? And I think people get paralyzed because there's so many good options. It's just there's so much to do.
Coming up, living on the veg. We'll explore why more and more athletes are opting for plant-based diets and how an entire UK soccer team is committed to the vegan lifestyle. This is Bloomberg Green.
The science is screaming at us. So this is a crisis, the climate crisis, but it's also a moment of the greatest opportunity that we've had since perhaps the Industrial Revolution. We have no better partners than our friends here in Europe and the EU. It is important for us to align ourselves now.
All countries that are emitting greenhouse gases must raise ambition in order to keep alive the prospect that we hold the temperature increase to well below 2 degrees, as it says in the Paris Agreement.
It will take every country, and it will be more than governments. It will take the civic society of our states, unities, our nations, and it will take the private sector, importantly.
I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. We've heard what President Biden's climate envoy, John Kerry, has been saying this week as he tours Europe. But for everything else, let's get to Jennifer Zabazaja for your Green Brief.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Progress on climate change needs to be 10 times faster to prevent catastrophic, irreversible changes to the planet. And according to the Global Carbon Project, that's just for the countries where emissions are falling, not the others. Another report says coastal communities are even more vulnerable than previously thought to rising sea levels. Last month, temperatures in the Arctic were much warmer than the average for the past 20 years. Scientists are linking that to extreme weather elsewhere in the world, including that blast of cold air and frost that hit Texas. 10 years on from the Fukushima disaster, and Greenpeace says just 15% of the affected land has been cleaned up. The government claims the area has been mostly decontaminated, but the environmental group says its own readings are far above Japan's target levels. And as much as half of the world's electricity is consumed by motors, powering everything from cars to industries. But now, a startup backed by Iron Man himself and one of the world's richest men is trying to make them more environmentally friendly. Turntide is teaming up with Bill Gates and Robert Downey Jr. for a new type of motor that uses nearly a third less energy. And that's your Green Brief. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York. Anne-Marie?
They may talk beef on the field, but the Forest Green Rovers football club won't be having burgers anytime soon. The UK-based team is an all-vegan club that has just one goal in mind, and that's sustainability. Meet the greenest team in soccer. Sorry, football. Soccer? Anyway, meet the Forest Green Rovers, the team kicking sports sustainability up a notch. The Gloucestershire-based League Two football club is the only all-vegan football club in the world. There's been no meat or dairy sold at its stadium since 2015. But are fans okay without the beef? Club owner Dale Vince says there were complaints at first.
At the beginning, we had some fans complain, but from a point of view of principle, they were saying, you know, you're telling us what to eat, you're dictating to us. And we said, no, come on, that's to look at it the wrong way. All we're doing is taking responsibility for our own menu. You know, if you go into a curry house, you can't demand a pizza because they don't do pizza. And here we don't do animal products. And we said, look, a home game is 2 hours a fortnight. Why don't you come and try something different instead of something you always have? And they did, and they love it.
But veganism alone won't get you to carbon neutrality. In a few years, the team will have new turf, a 5,000-seat all-wood stadium called Eco Park. I spoke with Vince about the design.
It was a revelation to us that 75% of the carbon footprint of all sports stadia for their entire life doesn't come from the energy used to run them, it comes from the materials used to make them. It's embedded on day one. And by choosing wood as a material, predominantly there'll be no concrete, very little steel, we'll have the lowest carbon footprint stadium in the world since the Romans invented concrete, which I think is an incredible thing.
Other sustainable features include solar panels, an electric car charging network, and rainwater recycling. Even the team's shirts will be made from leftover coffee grounds. And brewing up new ideas in the battle against climate change is nothing new for Vince. In 1996, he created Ecotricity, a wind energy empire that made him rich. And since then, he's developed electric cars, invested in wave energy technology, and even claims to have developed the world's only sky diamonds, lab-grown gems made from carbon sourced directly from the air. For all that glitters, the gold is the impact that Vince and his team want to make on environmental policy.
This is something I've been arguing for, particularly in the UN forum. What do we do? How do we encourage, the take-up of this stuff? And one of the things I've said is that we have, for example, in football, ground grading regulations. So to be in League Two, we have to meet certain criteria. There are no environment criteria in there, but there could be. So there could be, for example, minimum standards for recycling and for waste, for food choices and that kind of stuff. So it's one of the arguments that we're putting forward.
The UK has committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but critics like Vince say it's just not ambitious enough.
2050 is too far away. I'm not the only person that thinks that. I think we need to be aiming for 2030 to have made enormous strides. We won't get to zero carbon by 2030, I don't think, however hard we try, but we've got to be more ambitious in 2050. What I would say is that we can see an increase in the interest in the population of our country and around the world, really, that's increasing concern about the climate crisis.
As Dale Vince and the Forest Green Rovers will tell you, the goal is to make climate change a team effort. While Forest Green Rovers took a top-down approach, some athletes are finding their way to climate-friendly lifestyles for other reasons. Former boxing world heavyweight champion David Haye, he famously went vegan in 2014 ahead of his comeback to the sport. And Serena Williams, she says that while on tour, she adheres to a strict plant-based diet. So why are so many top professionals choosing to cut out meat and dairy? Well, Quick Take's Rosalie A. Silva spoke with martial artist Will Brooks and former world champion surfer Tia Blanco about why the lifestyle change was so important.
Now this year, a record 500,000 people pledged to eat only vegan food in January. The reasons for joining Veganuary include health, the animals, and the environment. Athletes are also fueling up on plants and following a vegan diet to help boost their performance and recovery. We're joined by Will Brooks, a martial artist who trains in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, Will says he's in the best shape of his life since he became vegan. Will, how has becoming vegan changed your performance?
Well, I had been plagued with tennis elbow and golfer's elbow for years and years when I was eating meat. And on top of that, I injured my spine pretty badly right before I went vegan, and I was dealing with a lot of joint pain. So as soon as I went vegan, about 2 weeks in, all my joint pain was gone. It's overall improved every aspect of my athletic life. The power of the plants is real, and I have made a lot of progress that I would have never seen if I hadn't switched to being vegan. So it's been life-changing.
Well, unlike Will, 23-year-old pro surfer Tia Blanco grew up vegetarian, and she became vegan 8 years ago. Tia, do you think becoming vegan gave you a competitive edge?
Yes, I definitely think that being vegan has given me somewhat of a competitive edge. I think first and foremost, I've noticed a great difference in my energy levels. I feel very strong, and especially when I cut out dairy, I noticed that I just had a lot more energy. My recovery levels were way better.
Have you seen a change in attitudes towards veganism from other athletes?
Well, I've been vegan now for 8 years, and I would definitely say that when I first went vegan, I got a lot of crap from my peers for being vegan, and people didn't really understand it. I think myself and other vegan athletes out there in other sports have proven that you can be vegan and you can be strong and successful without eating meat.
There's already a heightened level of awareness with athletes, just because seeing what we're doing now, but as time progresses, more people become interested and see that what's capable, what you're able to do on plants. I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the future.
So what's your advice to someone who might be considering starting to follow a vegan diet?
Number one, I would suggest that you educate yourself and learn about all the benefits that come with being vegan. And number two, I would say to not be so hard on yourself. Nobody's perfect, and just making conscious decisions with every meal to be better is good enough.
Coming up, the fastest electric car on 4 wheels. Formula E is betting that it can shake up motorsport as its 7th series gets underway. This is Bloomberg Green.
Formula One, sadly it's a well-kept secret, has the lowest emission carbon combustion engine on the planet today, combined with a big electrification component to it. It's the appropriate thing for Aston Martin to do in our high-performance luxury segment we're in.
This is Bloomberg Green, and I'm Amory Hordern. As green as Formula One gets, until they replace those engines with batteries, they won't come close to Formula E. The all-electric motorsport was recognized this season by the FIA as a world championship, putting it on par with its gas-guzzling neighbor in terms of prestige, even if prize money and viewership lag behind. But it's all city center circuits made possible by the zero-emission cars gives Formula E something unique that many are betting could carve out its own niche in the sports industry.
With the electric car revolution firmly upon us, what is the future of motorsport? Combustion engine racing isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But can it claim any credit for innovation when the industry is going electric? With top speeds of 174 miles per hour, Formula E is the obvious bridge. Launched in 2014, the competition's new season has now officially been recognized as a World Championship Series by the International Automobile Federation. The sport is backed by some big investors, and it signed a 10-year contract with Saudi Arabia to hold races there.
I think racing in general will have a responsibility the same way other sectors do, right? So I think in the future, that's only my prediction, in 10 years' time or more, you will have historic racing where people as a hobby will race old cars, whatever they are, because they were the great technology at the time. But all the modern, relevant racing will sooner or later will have to become electric because that's where the relevance to the road cars will be.
Formula E organizers say attendance in 2019 across its 13 races eclipsed 400,000, up 9% compared to the previous season. Total TV viewership was 411 million. The pandemic, like all sports, has hurt Formula E's growth and revenue, but there are other setbacks as well. Audi and BMW announced the 7th season will be their last. The reason? The manufacturers need to shift resources towards developing mass-market e-vehicles. Yet, innovation within the sport is feeding the consumer market. Battery packs for Formula E are all supplied solely by Lucid's Ativa arm, which holds the contract through 2023. They designed the first battery pack, allowing racers to complete courses on a single charge. Previously, cars were swapped out during pit stops. Now, Lucid is putting this technology toward a consumer sedan model to rival Tesla.
So if Lucid can transfer this technology to commercial electric vehicles, it could give them a real advantage when compared to other EVs on the market.
The high-end version of the Lucid Air is designed to have 1080 horsepower and clear a quarter mile in 9.9 seconds. So, will impressive specs like this provide the adrenaline that draws fans to racing? Or is that beside the point?
I think the whole point of Formula E is to also showcase the urgency of the problem. Climate change is not something that's theoretical, it's something we need to address right now. Formula E is also used as a platform to do that, to talk about the bigger picture, not just the electric cars, but the fact that we need to switch to renewable energy as soon as possible, we need to reduce the waste, all these things that we need to be doing.
As electric cars fill racing circuits and city streets, what does it mean for the quality of the air that we breathe? Well, resident climate expert Akshat Rathi has been looking at the scientific research surrounding air pollution, especially with respiratory illnesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. Akshat, this become very, very prevalent, obviously very relevant to the athletes, right? But when it comes to everyday people, we're seeing more cyclists on the street, more people are going outside because of lockdown restrictions indoors. What do we know about air quality?
Recent scientific studies have shown that essentially there is no safe limit. And that's because air pollution is made up of these tiny particles that don't just enter the lungs, but through the lungs enter the bloodstream and then get into pretty much every organ in the body. They can cause strokes, heart diseases, cancers, you name it. And it's something that we need to tackle, especially for athletes who are out there breathing a lot more air if they're working out or playing.
And we know in developing countries, I mean, this is the picture of smog in Delhi, but this has affected games being played, athletes' performances and health, hasn't it?
Yes. I have a memory of this 2017 game that happened in Delhi between Sri Lanka and India. And the air pollution got so bad, and Delhi is known for it around the world, but in the game you had players vomiting. And I haven't seen an inquiry happen about how to tackle this going forward because sports is not going to stop.
We also have the Chinese Olympics coming up in 2022. It's the Winter Olympics, so a little bit different, but are there concerns about the air quality?
So not so much because it's the Winter Olympics, but we do know that when the 2008 Summer Olympics happened in Beijing, and Beijing was the Delhi of air pollution at the time, they had to put restrictions on cars and shut down factories. And so the Chinese have since been more active on air pollution. In the recent 5-year plan, which got a little bit of flavor on what they're going to do on climate policies, they definitely did push down on air pollution going forward.
All right, our resident climate expert, Akshat Rathi, thank you so much for that. That does it for this week's edition. Follow us on Twitter, though, @Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.